It's 2 a.m. You're holding money in your hand, or maybe just looking at your bank balance. Nothing looks wrong. Same numbers, same feeling of safety, but quietly, something has already been taken from you. Not by a thief, not by a fee, not by a tax office letter. It's taken in silence. And the strange part is, you're not supposed to notice it happening, because the moment you do, the entire system starts to look different. Let's start with something simple. 10 years ago, with a certain amount of money, you could fill a shopping basket. Rice, oil, rent, electricity, transport, maybe even save a little. Today, with the same amount, you feel it. The basket is lighter, but the bill is heavier, and nothing in your wallet ever sent you a warning. No notification, no alarm, no deduction line, just less. This is the invisible mechanism most people live inside without ever naming it. Money doesn't stay still. It slowly changes what it can do. And that silent change has a name: inflation. But calling it inflation makes it sound technical, almost harmless, like a weather update. In reality, it behaves more like a slow leak in your financial life. Not dramatic, not sudden, just steady enough that you adjust instead of question. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Inflation isn't just rising prices. That's the surface story. The deeper story is this: your money is losing purchasing power while sitting still. Let's make it concrete. Imagine you keep $100 in cash for a year. No spending, no risk, just holding it. Now, imagine everything around you becomes roughly 5% more expensive in that same time. Nothing dramatic, just small increases. At the end of the year, your 100 still looks like 100, but it behaves like 95. You didn't lose money, but your money lost power. And that distinction is where most confusion begins, because we're trained to think of loss as something visible, something that disappears. Inflation doesn't do that. It preserves the number while changing the meaning. Now, zoom out. Why does this happen at all? Governments and central banks don't accidentally allow it. They manage it, because modern economies are built on movement, not stillness. If money never changed value, people would hold it tightly. Spend less, invest less, borrow less, and the entire system, jobs, growth, production, would slow down. So instead, most economies aim for a small, controlled level of inflation, just enough to encourage spending, just enough to keep money moving. Think of it like gently sloping ground instead of flat land. You don't notice you're walking downhill until you realize how far you've gone. But here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone experiences this slope equally. If you earn money from wages, salary, hourly work, you feel inflation differently than someone who owns assets. Because wages tend to adjust slowly. Prices adjust quickly. And that gap is where pressure builds. Let's say your salary increases 3% in a year, but real-world costs rise 6%. On paper, you got a raise. In reality, you lost ground. This is why people often say, "I'm earning more, but saving less." It's not a contradiction. It's timing. Now let's add another layer. Not all prices rise equally. Food, housing, education, healthcare, these often rise faster than average. And these are not luxury categories. They are survival categories. So inflation doesn't just reduce purchasing power evenly. It hits essential life costs harder. That's where it becomes emotionally sharp, because it doesn't feel like numbers anymore. It feels like pressure at the checkout counter, or rent renewal season, or the grocery bill that quietly stopped fitting the same budget. Now here's the part most people never see directly. Where does the extra money in the system come from? In modern economies, new money is largely created through banking systems and central financial policy. When loans are issued, money effectively enters circulation. When economies need stimulus, liquidity increases. And when there is more money chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices adjust upward. Not instantly, not evenly, but consistently over time. So the system expands and your currency dilutes, not because someone stole from your account, but because the total pool changed while your share stayed the same. It's like slicing a pie into more pieces without baking a bigger pie. You still hold a slice, but the slice represents less of the whole. Now there's a common reaction here. If inflation is predictable, why not just avoid holding cash at all? And this is where the system becomes more complex and more ironic. Because cash still feels safe, it feels stable, it feels like control. But in reality, it's one of the only financial assets designed to slowly lose value by design in a growing economy. Not collapse, not crash, just erode quietly. And that's why many people unknowingly do something else instead. They try to save more cash, to feel secure, while that very cash becomes less powerful over time. Now contrast this with assets. Things like property, businesses, or stocks are not perfect shields, but they behave differently. They are linked to productivity, demand, and growth. So when prices rise broadly, these assets often adjust upward too. That's why over long periods, asset owners tend to keep pace with or outgrow inflation, while pure cash holders fall behind. Not because of effort, because of structure. Now let's zoom out further. What does all of this mean at a global level? It means there are two realities happening at the same time. One is visible: jobs, salaries, prices, markets. The other is invisible: the gradual reshaping of what money represents. And most people only notice the second one when it becomes personal. When savings feel smaller. When plans take longer. When the future feels slightly more expensive than expected. There's a subtle psychological effect here too. Inflation doesn't just reduce purchasing power. It changes expectations. People start adjusting what they think is affordable. Not because income changed first, but because prices moved first. That reversal matters, because it quietly rewires financial decisions. Now here's the contradiction at the heart of it all. A stable economy needs some inflation. But too much inflation destroys trust, and too little inflation slows growth. So policymakers constantly try to walk a narrow path between stability and momentum. But from the individual perspective, it doesn't feel like balance. It feels like drift. And drift is hard to notice while it's happening. It only becomes obvious when you compare 2 points far apart in time. Now imagine something. You could freeze money in time so it never loses value. Sounds perfect at first. But in that world, people would hoard it. Spending would collapse. Lending would freeze. Economic movement would slow dramatically. So instead, we accept a system where money slowly changes shape over time, in exchange for a system that keeps moving. That trade-off is rarely explained clearly, because it's not emotional on the surface, but it is deeply structural underneath. And that brings us to the final tension. If money is always changing value, then saving is no longer a passive act. It becomes an active decision about where value is stored over time. And most people were never taught to think in those terms, so they treat money like a static object, when in reality, it behaves more like a living measurement that adjusts with the system around it. Which leads to a final question. If the money you hold today is not designed to stay equal tomorrow, then what does it really mean to be financially safe in a system where value is always moving underneath your feet?